They never wanted you to know this. While most people live trapped in the third dimension, chasing money, status, and approval, as a small group has already learned to operate in a state where time and space are no longer barriers. You, without realizing it, already tap into this frequency from time to time, but you have been conditioned to ignore it. This knowledge has circulated in restricted circles for decades, used to accumulate power, shape events, and attract opportunities. Meanwhile, you have been trained to believe that everything depends on struggle, sacrifice, and waiting. Every day, trapped in that logic is another day, and your energy feeds systems that survive on your distraction. Now, there is a chance to break this pattern and access the real mechanism of reality creation, the one that turns intention into event and desire into fact. But this window will not remain open forever. Those who do not adjust their frequency now will remain stuck in the old machine. The decision is in front of you.
Most people live under the comfortable illusion that reality is stable, fixed, and obedient to immutable laws that conventional science describes. But this is only a partial narrative, carefully shaped to keep attention locked on what is visible and measurable. Behind the solid appearance of things, there is a dynamic vibrational field where consciousness and energy intertwine, and it is there that the true architecture of human experience is designed. What we call the physical world is nothing more than one layer of a much broader spectrum of existence. Quietly, a portion of humanity already operates beyond it, even without realizing it. The transition underway is not political, nor is it technological in the superficial sense. It is a mutation in the very way of perceiving and interacting with reality, the passage from the third to the fifth dimension. This is not about moving to another planet or crossing celestial portals, although some traditions use that symbolic language. It is a leap in the quality of consciousness, a shift in the vibrational state that radically changes how events, relationships, and circumstances manifest. The fifth dimension is not a separate territory in space. It coexists right now in the same place you are, just like multiple radio frequencies coexist in the air. What changes is the tuning. While the third dimension is dominated by the perception of separation, effort, and the linearity of time, the fifth is based on interconnection, flow, and simultaneity. This means that the job you imagine, the house you visualize, and the relationship you desire do not need to be pursued as distant targets. They already exist, waiting only for your frequency to align so they can collapse into your field of experience. This assertion directly contradicts the chase after it logic that shapes modern culture. From an early age, education and society program the mind to believe that achievements are the direct result of physical effort and relentless struggle. However, those who already operate, at least partially, on the frequency of the fifth dimension know that this equation is reversed. It is not brute effort that creates, but the sustained internal state. It is the coherent vibrational field, charged with clear intention, that magnetizes people, circumstances, and opportunities. Science still hesitates to state this openly, but studies on heart coherence, electromagnetic fields, and neuroplasticity already leave cracks for this understanding to seep in. The interest in this subject is growing because, for many, the signs of this transition are already tangible. Some notice coincidences, multiplying to the point of defying statistics, meaningful encounters happening at perfect moments, or a sense that something is coordinating events with invisible precision. Others report subtle physical changes, greater sensitivity to environments and people, a periodic need for isolation to rebalance, or even an inner shift that makes it hard to sustain old conversations and habits. All of this can be interpreted as symptoms of a vibrational realignment that has already begun. This is not mere mystical speculation. Modern interpreters of ancient spiritual principles, such as Neville Goddard, have shown that the human imagination is the creative power in action, operating behind the scenes of reality. His thesis, that feeling is the secret, converges with the fifth dimensional experience. By feeling the desired reality as if it is already real, consciousness reconfigures the energy field and collapses space-time, attracting the corresponding scenario. What once seemed like a miracle reveals itself as vibrational engineering. This is not a process reserved for isolated monks or rare visionaries. It is available to anyone willing to abandon the restricted view that life is a linear sequence of purely physical causes and effects. Here is the unsettling truth. This change is already happening on a collective scale, whether you are aware of it or not. Ignoring it does not stop it. It only delays your conscious participation in it. In the course of this exploration, we will uncover the mechanisms of this transition, the concrete signs that you are already living, at least partially, in the fifth dimension, and the ways to stabilize this frequency until it stops being the exception and becomes the norm. To understand the scope of this dimensional transition, it is necessary to first deconstruct what is meant by dimension outside of the limited vocabulary of school-level physics. Common sense tends to reduce the idea to spatial coordinates, such as length, width, and height, plus time. While this definition is useful for measuring objects and calculating trajectories, it is insufficient to explain realities that can be perceived by those who enter expanded states of consciousness. In spiritual and esoteric contexts, dimension is not a physical address, but a vibrational pattern of existence, a state of consciousness that determines the quality of the reality that is perceived. The third dimension, which dominates the daily experience of most people, is characterized by a perception of separation between the observer and the observed, by a linear time that appears to move in a single direction, and by a constant need for effort to maintain or to achieve anything. This is the dimension where matter is perceived as solid, physical laws are taken as absolute, and identity is shaped by the ego and by external narratives. Here, a person's value is often measured by the ability to compete and to accumulate. The fifth dimension, on the other hand, operates under completely different parameters. In it, the notion of separation dissolves. It becomes clear that everything that exists is interconnected by an invisible field, and time ceases to be a line and is experienced instead as a set of coexisting possibilities. This does not mean that matter disappears or that physical laws stop functioning. It means that interaction with them takes place at a subtler level where consciousness directly shapes the course of events. In 5D, creation does not arise from physical effort, but from the sustained vibrational state. This understanding did not appear out of nowhere. It is grounded in ancient traditions that, under different names and symbols, already pointed to the existence of multiple levels of reality. Vedic texts describe lokas, interpenetrating planes of existence. Hermetic schools speak of subtle and dense planes coexisting. Christian mystics interpret the many mansions in my Father's house as a metaphor for states of consciousness. Neville Goddard, one of the most incisive interpreters of this vision in the 20th century, insisted that we do not go anywhere, we simply enter states. For him, every scenario and every person in life is a direct projection of the internal state, and altering that state inevitably alters the external scene. This view resonates with contemporary research into the interaction between the mind, the body, and the electromagnetic field. Neuroscience has documented how coherent patterns of brainwaves, aligned with heart coherence, produce physiological changes and influence the perception of reality. The HeartMath Institute, for example, studies how the electromagnetic field of the heart, which is far stronger than that of the brain, can be influenced by emotional states and, in turn, interact with the environment. Quantum physics, though often misinterpreted, already acknowledges that the observer influences the behavior of particles at the subatomic level. While these findings are not definitive proof of higher dimensions, they weaken the narrative that consciousness is merely a byproduct of the physical brain. In today's context, ascension is spoken of not as an escape from the world, but as a gradual realignment of vibrational frequency, both individual and planetary. This shift affects the physical body, which must adjust to sustain higher states of consciousness. Symptoms such as heightened sensitivity to sounds, lights, and the emotional fields of others, changes in sleep and diet, and even sudden shifts in interests and values are often reported by those in transition. These adjustments are not random side effects. They are the biological system's responses to a different energetic pattern. According to this perspective, the Earth itself is also undergoing a vibrational elevation. This is not merely a poetic metaphor. Measurements of the Schumann resonance, the planet's natural electromagnetic frequency, have shown significant variations in recent years. While conventional science attributes these variations to solar and ionospheric factors, some alternative researchers maintain that these spikes are correlated with collective expansions of consciousness. If that correlation is more than a coincidence, then the shift is not merely internal, but part of a systemic recalibration involving the entire planetary ecosystem. During this process, challenges do not vanish. On the contrary, they become catalysts. Old problems and conflicts resurface, not to punish, but to offer portals of expansion. In 3D, an obstacle is a wall. In 5D, it is a door, and passing through it requires dissolving attachment to drama and to the victim narrative. This is one of the most destabilizing aspects for those beginning to awaken, realizing that blame does not lie with others or with circumstances, but with the internal state that sustains them. Here again, Neville Goddard is direct. Changing the world means changing yourself and nothing else. Understanding these fundamentals dismantles the limited view that confines human experience to a single plane of existence. It also prepares the ground for grasping how, in practice, it is possible to consciously operate in a higher vibrational state without abandoning daily life. From here, it becomes inevitable to examine how this principle translates into practice and how it changes the fundamental logic by which reality organizes itself. At the heart of this entire shift lies a principle that, to a mind conditioned by the third dimension, can seem almost heretical. It is not you who goes after what you desire. It is what you desire that is drawn to you, as long as your internal frequency is compatible. This reversal of the dominant logic is the backbone of life in the fifth dimension. And it is not merely an inspirational metaphor, but a specific energetic mechanism that can be measured in vibrational terms. In 3D, the paradigm is linear. First, you identify a goal, then you create an action plan, and finally, you apply continuous effort until the target is reached. This approach is based on the assumption that there is a real separation between what you are and what you desire, and that the distance must be traveled step by step. However, in the 5D state of consciousness, this distance does not exist in any absolute sense. What exists are fields of resonance, patterns of frequency that, when they match, collapse time and space as perceptual barriers, bringing what is in potential into concrete manifestation. This collapse does not mean that events happen without any physical action. It means that action ceases to be the primary engine and becomes instead the natural consequence of an already aligned internal state. The energy that once scattered into effort, obsessive planning, and resistance against circumstances now concentrates on sustaining vibrational coherence, something that involves the mind, the body, and the energy field in an integrated way. Here, the role of clear intention becomes crucial. A vague intention is like a weak signal broadcast into a sea of noise. It finds no match. But when the intention is precise and infused with authentic feeling, it generates a coherent pattern of brainwaves that couples with the electromagnetic field of the heart. It is this fusion, mental intention and felt emotion, that creates the magnetism capable of reorganizing probabilities and drawing the desired scenario toward you. Neville Goddard called this feeling the wish fulfilled and sustaining it until the outer world has no choice but to reflect that internal condition. Consider the contrast. In 3D, you send resumes to dozens of companies and wait anxiously for a reply. In 5D, the job finds you through an unexpected contact or an improbable situation that feels orchestrated. In 3D, you visit properties for months trying to find the perfect home. In 5D, the opportunity appears after you have stopped searching but have kept alive the feeling of living in your ideal space. This difference is not a coincidence or luck, it is the direct consequence of operating as a coherent magnetic field. The crucial point here is understanding that, in this model, the how is no longer your responsibility. The mind conditioned to 3D insists on controlling every step, but the vibrational field of 5D functions through self-organization. It adjusts variables, connects people, and rearranges circumstances around the dominant frequency. This is perhaps the most uncomfortable shift for those beginning the transition, because it demands letting go of compulsive control and trusting an invisible mechanism. From a neurophysiological standpoint, this state is not passivity. The brain, in coherence with the heart, produces a wave pattern, often associated with the alpha or theta state, that keeps perception open and receptive, reducing internal resistance. This not only fosters insights and intuition, but also improves emotional regulation, allowing the body to remain in a state of expansion rather than contraction. Coherence, in this sense, is not an abstract concept, but a measurable physiological condition that translates directly into personal magnetism. When this coherence is sustained, space-time ceases to be perceived as a barrier. Events that, in linear logic, would take months or years can unfold in days or hours. This does not mean that physical laws are being broken, but that physical reality is responding to a subtler set of instructions, ones issued by the field of consciousness. This is why the concept of attraction in 5D is so different from superficial interpretations of the so-called law of attraction. Here, it is not about mechanical repetition of affirmations, but about maintaining a vibrational state that already incorporates the result as present. From this point on, it becomes clear why experiences in the fifth dimension cannot simply be taught as linear techniques. They must be lived as a continuous state where every thought, emotion, and choice either reinforces or weakens the personal magnetic field. This is also why, for many, the transition is unstable in the beginning. There are oscillations between moments of crystalline clarity and relapses into old patterns of fear, anxiety, or excessive control. Understanding the core concept, therefore, is more than memorizing a theory. It is realizing that every interaction, every conversation, and even every silence is an opportunity to calibrate the internal frequency. It is accepting that the vibrational field does not lie. If conscious intention says one thing but the emotional state feels another, the frequency that prevails will always be the one truly sustained, not the one merely declared. This is the part that few are willing to admit because it demands radical honesty with oneself. This understanding not only supports, but also connects all the other aspects of this transition, functioning as the invisible axis around which everything else is organized. If the core concept of the fifth dimension is the reversal from the logic of pursuit to the logic of magnetic attraction, then the practical aspects of this shift reveal themselves through profound transformations, both internal and in external interactions. And these are not merely subtle changes noticeable only to a trained eye. For those who experience them, they are unmistakable and often impossible to ignore. The first sign is the restructuring of the energetic system. This process is not limited to the subjective realm of feeling something. It produces concrete effects on the physical body, the mind, and even on cellular memory. It is as if every cell receives an update command, releasing old data that is no longer compatible with the new vibrational operating system. Traumas, stresses, and emotional patterns, whether inherited or developed since childhood, begin to surface, not to punish or to reopen wounds, but to be dissolved. At this stage, many people notice an acceleration. Emotional cycles that once took years to understand and integrate now reveal themselves and resolve in a matter of weeks or even days. This internal clearing exposes the second key aspect, an increase in vibrational sensitivity. Suddenly, it becomes impossible to ignore the density of certain environments or the dissonance in someone's words. Perception penetrates the surface and picks up the true intention behind actions. This is not about mind reading. It is about reading energy fields, something that, in the fifth dimension, is as natural as recognizing tone of voice or body language in 3D. However, this sensitivity is not optional. It requires discernment and constant energetic hygiene, because prolonged exposure to misaligned environments quickly drains the personal field. With this heightened perception, relationships go through an inevitable realignment. The fifth dimension exposes and dissolves social masks with uncomfortable precision. Dynamics that were sustained by manipulation, emotional dependence, or the silent game of savior and victim stop being tolerable. Simply holding on to a false role becomes energetically exhausting. This is why many people naturally drift away from old friends, family members, or partners, not due to explicit conflict, but because the frequencies no longer match. Here emerges a liberating understanding: you cannot save anyone. Each person chooses, at the soul level, the experiences they will go through and the pace at which they will make their own changes. Interfering in this process, no matter how well-intentioned it seems, wastes energy and paradoxically can delay the other person's growth. This realization dismantles the 3D mentality, which often rests on the idea of fixing or rescuing others. In 5D, love expresses itself more as presence and respect for each person's divine timing than as compulsive intervention. This understanding resonates with Neville Goddard's view that the other is always you projected. If every encounter is a reflection of your internal state, then trying to change someone without changing yourself is like trying to adjust the image in a mirror by moving only the reflection. This perspective transforms the dynamics of human connections. By raising your own frequency, you naturally attract people who reflect that new state, and inversely, those who do not resonate with it simply drift away. The fourth notable aspect is the transformation of the emotional body. As memories and old patterns are cleared, the emotional body stops reacting impulsively to external triggers. This does not mean apathy, it means stability. Intense emotions still arise, but they dissipate quickly because they no longer find internal structures to cling to. Inner peace, once considered a distant achievement, becomes the default state. This profoundly changes the way you interact with the world. Decisions are made from clarity rather than urgency, and intuition takes precedence over fragmented reasoning. Another key development is the repositioning into the role of observer. Instead of being pulled into three-dimensional drama, consciousness creates an inner space between stimulus and response. This distance is where higher consciousness can act, illuminating choices that might otherwise go unnoticed. The ability to observe without judgment, and to act without being contaminated by the energy of the problem is a turning point. It prevents attention from being hijacked by conflict and keeps the vibrational field stable, which is essential for remaining in the 5D frequency. This observer stance also drastically affects the field of action. It becomes clear that certain urgencies are not real, but are distractions projected by systems that feed on scattered attention. By recognizing this, you begin to protect your field with rigor, choosing carefully where and with whom to invest energy. Inevitably, this leads to changes in professional paths, social circles, and even geographical location. The final point that links all the others is the cascading effect of internal coherence. Each internal vibrational adjustment produces external rearrangements that often happen so synchronistically that they seem like statistical improbabilities. A chance meeting that solves a long-standing problem, an opportunity that appears without direct effort, a situation that seemed blocked suddenly unlocking almost automatically. In the 3D logic, this is interpreted as coincidence or luck. In 5D, it is simply the natural mechanics of an aligned field. When analyzing these events, it becomes impossible to separate internal and external as distinct entities. In the 5th dimension, there is no real boundary between what you feel and what you live. Life responds as an amplified echo of the dominant frequency, and each internal adjustment is followed by a corresponding external response. This is not a motivational belief. It is a repeated observation made by those who have sustained this state long enough to see the pattern emerge again and again. These aspects, energetic restructuring, vibrational sensitivity, transformation of relationships, emotional stabilization, the role of observer, and internal coherence, are not linear stages, but interconnected expressions of the same process. Recognizing and understanding them is essential so as not to mistake the symptoms of transition for problems or losses. In truth, each one represents the strategic release of everything that no longer resonates, making room for consciousness to fully anchor in a new level of existence. These changes are not isolated pieces, but interlocking gears of the same mechanism. It is by understanding this mechanism that the doors open to the broader implications of this transition. Once you understand the mechanics and the signs of the 5th dimension, it becomes impossible to avoid the central question: how does this shift change everyday life in a practical and measurable way? This is not only about experiencing subtle phenomena or noticing unusual coincidences. The impact seeps into decisions, behaviors, and priorities, quietly reorganizing the way every aspect of life is structured. One of the most evident developments is the rise of the conscious observer's role. In the 3rd dimension, the automatic tendency is to react, to let circumstances dictate your internal state. In the 5th dimension, the process reverses. You create an inner space between stimulus and response, a pause in which higher consciousness can step in. This space is strategic territory because, within it, drama loses its grip and clarity takes over. From this position, it is no longer about controlling circumstances, but about allowing the response to emerge from a point of stability and alignment. This skill of observation is not an exercise in passive neutrality. It is an active stance of vibrational monitoring. You learn to detect, almost instantly, when your energetic field begins to drift out of alignment, and you intervene before the disturbance can grow. This energetic proactivity is a game changer. In 3D logic, most people react too late, trying to fix the effects of an already compromised internal state. In 5D, you act at the source, adjusting the field before it translates into unwanted circumstances. This alignment demands radical choices. You become aware that not every energy deserves access to your field. The filter stops being merely moral or rational and becomes vibrational. It is not about liking or disliking someone or something, but about recognizing whether the frequency in question nourishes or drains you. This conscious selection often provokes deep changes in your social circle, professional partnerships, and even in the physical location where you live. For some, it means walking away from environments that once felt unavoidable. For others, it is the opportunity to create aligned networks that amplify the desired vibrational state. This filtering process is not isolation. On the contrary, it opens space for genuine connections that operate on the same frequency. By protecting your field, you avoid contamination by patterns that do not correspond to your intended state, preserving what is perhaps the most valuable resource of pentadimensional life: internal coherence. And when that coherence is maintained, it produces cascading effects. Small decisions made from it generate disproportionate results, shaping reality with more precision than any plan built on the linear logic of 3D. Another inevitable development is the strengthening of the energetic body as an absolute priority. This means integrating practices and habits that not only sustain physical vitality, but also reinforce vibrational stability. It is not about following spiritual trends or esoteric diets. It is about cultivating a constant relationship with your own energy, knowing how to recharge, how to clear yourself from external influences, and how to expand your field when necessary. Over time, this attention to the energetic body becomes as natural as maintaining physical hygiene. This solid foundation prepares the ground for the expansion of the multidimensional self. When you anchor consistently in the fifth dimension, consciousness begins to access even subtler layers of reality, those that some traditions call the sixth, seventh dimension, or beyond. At this stage, the separation between thought, word, and manifestation narrows to the point that speech itself gains immediate creative weight. Statements charged with clarity and certainty begin to generate perceptible effects without the delay characteristic of 3D. This is not a coincidence or miracle. It is the natural functioning of a field that is fully unobstructed and aligned. In this process, the old mind, shaped by conditioning, fears, and rigid identities, begins to dissolve. For many, this is a strange experience, looking at old photos or remembering past situations and feeling as if they were memories from another lifetime. Mental clarity increases exponentially, and illusions once well disguised by the ego become transparent. What was once accepted as normal reveals itself as artificial, and the impulse to live according to those artifices simply disappears. The consequence of this dissolution is a growing state of lightness and inner spaciousness. This is not continuous euphoria, but a stable calm that settles in as a backdrop. Resistance to the present moment drops dramatically. Circumstances that would once have triggered anxiety or frustration are now received as part of a larger flow, understood within a broader context of life's purpose. This acceptance is not resignation. It is a conscious choice to stop wasting energy fighting what is already manifested, redirecting it instead toward creating what still exists in potential. At the collective level, these changes carry significant implications. A critical mass of people operating from the vibrational coherence of 5D inevitably alters the collective field. This affects social, economic, and even power structures that depend on individuals remaining locked into the frequency of scarcity, fear, and reactivity. Although these systems resist, their functioning becomes increasingly unstable as more people stop feeding them energetically. This transition, however, is not uniform. Each person experiences it according to their own ascension program, shaped by soul-level choices that precede this physical lifetime. For this reason, comparing timelines or trying to force stages only creates frustration. True progress lies in recognizing the signs along your own path and deepening internal alignment, without the need to measure yourself against anyone else's progress. Ultimately, the developments of the fifth dimension translate into a radical shift of power. The command center is no longer out there, in circumstances, in institutions, or in social expectations, but within. Life stops being a continuous reaction to external stimuli and becomes a conscious, creative act in which every thought, emotion, and action is a deliberate choice rather than an automatic response. This shift marks the threshold between merely observing the change and fully embracing it as a permanent condition of existence. After exploring the fundamentals, the core concept, and the implications of the fifth dimension, it becomes clear that this transition is not a remote hypothesis. It is an active process already underway that does not depend on individual belief in order to exist. What determines its intensity for each person is only the degree of awareness with which they choose to live it. This realization is uncomfortable because it dismantles the most common excuse, the idea that one day the conditions will be ideal for living fully in this state. The moment is always now, and postponing it is, in practice, deciding to remain oscillating between frequencies. All of the narrative converges on a central point. Reality is shaped by vibrational states, and this is not an exception or a privilege of the few. The difference between the three-dimensional and the five-dimensional experience lies in the clarity with which this law is perceived and applied. To live in 5D is to accept that every external event is the consequence of an internal configuration, and that there are no shortcuts to changing the scenery without adjusting the source. This recognition confronts the logic inherited from 3D, which places physical effort and linear control as the main engines of achievement. The logic of 5D relegates them to the role of final extensions of something that began in the vibrational field. And this reversal requires more than intellectual understanding. It demands the willingness to sustain internal states that do not yet have visible correspondence in the outer world, keeping them stable until alignment is translated into form. When that stability is reached, the relationship with the physical world changes entirely. Work, relationships, the body, and circumstances stop being seen as causes of the internal state and are recognized instead as effects. This dissolves the need to chase or to convince and shifts attention to the continuous calibration of one's own field, the most strategic action available. On an individual level, this shift implies radical responsibility. With no room to transfer blame, each person sees themselves as the origin of their own experience. On a collective level, it opens the way for larger transformations. As a growing number of individuals sustain vibrational coherence, patterns based on fear and scarcity begin to lose support. This is not an instant collapse, but a gradual draining of systems that depend on unconscious adherence in order to exist. Knowing this, however, is not the same as living anchored in that state. Stability in the fifth dimension requires practice, discipline, and the deliberate use of resources that help maintain coherence, even in the face of external stimuli that pull downward. The inevitable question then arises: if it is already possible to experience moments of clarity and spontaneous creation, what prevents those moments from becoming permanent? The answer points to a simple yet demanding core. You must regularly create the internal space where mental and emotional turbulence dissolves, allowing the creative intelligence to operate without distortion. This space is not conceptual, it is experiential, and the most direct way to access it is through meditation, not as an occasional pause for relaxation, but as a strategic tool for vibrational alignment. To meditate in this context is to reorganize the internal field so that thought and emotion operate in coherence. It is to restore the magnetism that naturally draws in what already exists in potential. It is to interrupt the cycle of reactivity and to assume the silent command of creation. This is the training that turns flashes of connection into a predominant state, allowing the frequency of the fifth dimension to become the fixed base of daily experience. Every change begins with understanding your role as a co-creator, and the only way to connect with this divine intelligence is through meditation. We have developed a set of audio tools to help you access this higher state of consciousness. To learn more and to gain immediate access, click the link on the screen or in the comments. If this video resonated with you, write in the comments, "It made sense to me." The choice is always in the frequency you decide to sustain, and it is that choice maintained consistently that transforms knowledge into lived reality.